it was fine. But he and I never got into the cockpit again. That's one of many of the stories, the experiences a person gets from meeting other people and the stories in the river allowed me to take the time and to write those down, and I'm very happy to do it.
What I liked about this one is, well, for example, there was I think a story in there about the 1970 flood.
Ah, yeah.
Where my father was upriver doing whatever a forest ranger does with a flood, which is panic, I suppose. And then we had a bunch of rain that day or the day before. So the water levels rise, I don't know, 10, 20 feet, just like within 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So your parents' home was down on the front street in Nelson, close to the Nelson's rural school at the time. So you're in the basement and the water level is rising on the river, but there's a drain pipe in the basement that crosses underneath the road into the riverbed itself to take any excess water.
Mm-hmm.
And the water starts to reverse and come into the basement.
Yeah.
And that really happened.
That was a wicked experience, that one. And it's exactly as you say, the ice, as it comes downriver, it tends then to raft as it's moving along, and rafting is simply a building up. Pancaking. And it pretty well, the whole river run at that time, that night, pretty well stopped in front of our house. And the height of the ice went up about, I think it was about 25, maybe 30 feet high. It gets come on top of it there. And as you were saying, John, is that the pressure just pushes back in the pipe. The water comes up, and boy, did it come up. And I remember how cold, and you never put your leg or foot in extremely cold water. Anyway, so we knew, me, Dad, and I, if we didn't do something, do it quick. So I had been working as a janitor part-time at the white school level in Nelson. And I remember that we had a sump pump up there. So I hooked her up and got the pump, brought it down. And by that time, and that would only wouldn't be any more than 25 minutes up and down. And from that time, that water would come up. It was probably about an inch or two above Dad's knees. And he was standing there, and he had taken a piece of plywood and put it over the cover of where the pipe was, and he was trying to hold it. And he was actually moving, but he wasn't moving. The off force of that water was moving. That was and the sound of that, I remember waking up. The sound of that was just like the freight train that used to run up a Bulwers, not far from your place.
That crosses the enclosure there.
Yeah, and the sound of it, oh my God, so frightening. It actually woke me up, and I had no clue as to what it could possibly be, because this never happened before. And then you rush outside and you go, but you can't see. You can't see a damn
you don't know
thing.
What's coming.
You hear the scene coming on there,
you know it's bad.
Holy frig, yeah. That was a incredibly frightening experience, yeah.
So you put a plug in the pipe.
And the sump pump, and then we ran the hose across the road. There wouldn't have been any amount of traffic around. And eventually the thing went down and saved the house. Yeah.
And there was a part, I think, in here where probably for maybe 30, 40 years, the first 30 and 40 years of your life, you, how did you say it? You stood by your parents. You did what was required as things came along.
Yeah, and that's I don't know if it's a generational thing, but the way that I was brought up and the way that you were brought up, the love for your parents was not an expressive thing. And that's typical of the time. It's typical of the community we lived in and the culture that we came from.
Yeah.
You can't express it, but outwardly. But any way that you had to give back, that's what you did. And that's what I after I left home to get married, I was at my parents a lot, and every possible thing that I could do. And I remember one experience described that Dad had taken a heart attack about, I think he must have been not 70 or so. And so we were in the emergency room, and Dad was not a man to express emotion, either positive or negative. He just, wasn't. So he was on the gurney, and he reached his hand up and grabbed mine and held onto it tightly. And he said, no, he said, I don't know if I'm going to make it or not, but I want you to take care of your mother. And there was no question there. It wasn't it was you were going to take care of your mother. There were none. And that was it.
Voluntold.
And from that period to the time Mom died in 2008, and he subsequently died in 2010, I was there. I was there for anything that but the problem in that, and it's okay if, and I'm going to go back to being a gay again. It's okay if your life is relatively balanced and you have things in order, but when you are one thing to them and another thing to yourself, and then you try all the time to keep the two in order, it doesn't work.
It creates a lot of internal conflict.
That tension, something.
And then there's guilt, and there's all this
exactly
useless emotions.
Yeah, they were useless, John. That's exactly what it was. They didn't mean no good. They didn't mean harm. And people that saw me one way, and the teaching was a good example of that. I loved teaching. I really did, but all the time. And I say this in one of my stories, the kids, the young people, they weren't kids, they were teenagers. They were teenagers struggling in their own lives, and I could have done more for them, but it was not going to happen.
We all could have done more.
Oh, that's exactly it. We all.
But there's only so much responsibility a child or a young person can take on and perform well and all of that. I mean, you do what you can do with the time you have and the health that you have at the time. But when I was brought into your family, your mother's family, your father's family, in '64 for 6 months, when we were born, James and I, we were premature, 2.5 and 3 pounds, and we were close to death.
Mm.
The doctor told my parents, "Don't name those kids. Huh? Don't name them. They're not going to make it." Okay then. So Mom was in the hospital for 6 months, and there was, I don't remember, but there was no questions asked or any resistance. Your mother took me in because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Because your mother and my mother were sisters.
They're very close. Very close.
Very close.
Yeah.
They, of course, had the same parents and grew up in Ramsey Street in Newcastle and had the same faith. They had the same... I suppose, character to some degree, and back then, trees were king back then, and forestry was a big deal back then, and my father was a forest ranger, and your father was a woodlands clerk. Do I understand that correct?
He was a bookkeeper and paymaster at Birchall's.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, anyway, back then when Birchall's was running, they had... from what I read, there was a very mechanically intelligent person with the last name of Russell. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, Israel Russell. Yeah.
Got him hit.
That's a nice segue. Yeah, the mill. I wrote that this past year as well, and it covers the 140 years from 1820 to roughly 1980, and it talks about the dynasty that was the Birchells. And I need to say, as I always say, the information I got came from Derek Birchall, the son of John Birchall. And John was the last owner-operator on the mill. And it's an interesting thing because the primary source, and I'm going to have to get drink of water.
Sure.
This is interesting because when John Birchall, Derek did a video interview of him, John used to stop all the time and have this drink of water. And here's his author of this book of him doing the very same thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, speaking dries your mouth out.
Especially as you get older.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, it chronicles the time that George Birchall came out from Miramichi in 1820 with his parents. And he set up working with Joseph Russell on the island shipbuilding. And eventually he himself, together with John Hurley, took over the building of the ships. And then Hurley, they just separated, and Hurley went one way, George went the other. George set up a retail store to provide for the loggers in the area.
Across from Governor's Mansion. Is that
Pretty well across, yes, it would have been, yeah.
Nelson.
And he, very, very successful. He's very good business person. And then he took over one of the existing mills when the owner wasn't able to keep doing it. And that was lumber. And again, he was very successful at that. And eventually he passed, and his son took it over for a while. The son was not really that interested. His son actually was more interested in governance, and he sat he was the youngest person in the legislature. No, legislature of the province.
Oh.
And then he passed, and the mill was taken over by a person that we would have known as Senator.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Percy Birchall, very colorful character. And actually, at the time of Percy, from Percy to John, not only were they very successful business people, but they were totally dedicated to their community. And for example, Percy, he worked with some folks to set up what we know as Northumberland Co-op. He was one of the people on that first committee. And he was also largely responsible for preventing an outbreak of tuberculosis. What was happening around the early 50s, people were using just pasteurized milk. And what was happening was that cases of tuberculosis were breaking out. So he heard that a doctor from St. John had come up with a way of pasteurizing the milk. And he and a few of the folks that he knew took a trip down, and they, when they did come back, they took the pasteurization process with them, and that was the start of what we know today as Northumberland Co-op. There's an interesting story in this as well because it's filled with characters. There's one where at the same time Percy Birchall had the lumber mill going, Leonard O'Brien operated what was called plaswood, which effectively is, you take and ground the wood up and then put it to glue. So not unlike what goes on over at the Urbeck. And of course, it was a much more rudimentary process. Anyway, the two of them existed in the same community. Now, this is 1930s, and just when the whole thing went apart, it actually started in 1920. Miramichi, there's a depression. It started in 1920 that went right through to 1939. Totally pulverized the place, like poverty that you might see in a third world country. There was no government assistance whatsoever, zero. So that whatever support they got from each other. So Percy knew Brian, well, they were not friends, of course, and they got together. They said, okay, let's go down into the States and see whether we can rustle up a market stronger than what we had here. Mm-hmm. So it was the 30s, and they were much better off than anybody else, except a few bucks. And Percy had a car, and it was a nice car, but it was old. And O'Brien said, okay, why don't we take your car and we'll go down there. And of course, O'Brien thinking to himself, well, my cost won't be as much. But anyway, and they were not, either one of them were, O'Brien was not a talker. He was very, some might describe him as being dour. And Virgil loved to talk. He loved to meet people. He loved to, get out and so here are the two of them going down.
Totally different characters.
Totally different. Going down into was Washington. They were going to, and they got down, and they got a bit of business, and they were coming back again, and they were still not talking. And the tires on the car were so badly worn, the tires are nothing like what they are today. So they got Tabaston Tack. They were getting ready to go up the Tabaston Tack hill when the tires blew. And they blew. There was 3 of the 4 tires blew. And there was no possible way for them to fix it. And it started to rain. And here's the two of them, the bottom of the Tabaston Tack hill in a huge rainstorm. And nobody could help them. And then the two of them eventually started talking a bit. They got home the next morning, and but O'Brien did. The guy that picked them up, O'Brien said, "I don't want to be dropped off in front of my house. It's too embarrassing." Yeah, two very different people, but two very interesting people. Yeah.
And that really emphasizes the mentality of the river, is because all we had was each other.
Yeah.
And
even if you didn't like the other person,
that didn't really matter.
You had to work with them.
I mean, everybody's family had to have food on the table, and
you had mentioned Israel Russell. Israel Russell was a 22-year-old fella when in Birchall's they did not have electricity in the
steam powered. Right?
Yeah, it was all steam powered. So you had, for example, they had this great big wheel that ran through belts, ran the various pieces of machinery. And what happened one day is that the wheel bearing went, caused the wheel to seize. The wheel flew off of the shaft right through the wall of the mill into the mill here. Fortunately, killed nobody. So, but there they were. So Percy got on the phone